The chandeliers of Lady Ashford's ballroom dripped golden light over a crush of silk and whispers. Muslin gowns the color of new cream brushed against dark superfine coats as the quadrille wound to its close, fans fluttering like the wings of tethered moths. Against the far wall, near a marble pillar garlanded with hothouse roses, Helena Vance stood in the half-shadow and watched the dance she had politely declined. She was, at 23, no fresh debutante to be paraded and prodded. Her honey-colored hair was dressed simply, a string of pearls her only adornment, and her gown, the pale blue-gray of a winter sky, was chosen for comfort, not conquest. She had been called a beauty often enough, the kind of beauty that drew the eye without demanding it. Symmetrical features, a mouth too serious for coquetry, eyes the color of rain-washed slate. Men looked. They seldom listened. From the pillar's other side, masculine voices carried with the careless volume of gentlemen who had taken their third glass of port before entering the ballroom. She recognized Lord Linleigh's drawl, the clipped tones of Sir Marquess Fleet, and the deeper, faintly bored cadence of Julian St. Clair, Marquess of Lockwood. "You could do worse than Vance's daughter," Linleigh was saying. "Pretty little thing, excellent hips for an heir." Helena's gloved fingers tightened on her fan. She did not move. Lockwood laughed, a sound like a silver coin dropped on stone, bright, hard, fleeting. "Miss Vance. She may be pretty enough to marry, but certainly not smart enough to speak. I have attempted conversation with her twice. She offered nothing beyond, indeed, my lord, and a vacant smile. I would sooner wed a particularly charming vase. At least a vase might hold something of interest." The words struck with a peculiar, soundless violence. They did not announce themselves with a crash. They simply entered the air she breathed and settled, cold and heavy, behind her ribs. She did not gasp. She did not allow her spine to bend. Some part of her brain noted with clinical detachment that Sir Marquess was chuckling and Linleigh was offering a half-hearted protest about her excellent connections. The rest of her mind had gone very still. A charming vase. The quadrille ended. Applause pattered. Helena drew a slow breath through her nose, let it out, and stepped away from the pillar with the unhurried grace she had learned across 8 London seasons. She did not glance toward Lockwood. She walked the length of the ballroom, collected her wrap from a footman, and informed her mother that she had developed a headache. Lady Vance, deep in a game of whist, waved her off with a murmured injunction to take hartshorn. The carriage ride home was silent save for the creak of wheels and the distant cry of a link boy. Inside, the Vance townhouse on Curzon Street lay quiet. Helena dismissed her maid and sat at her writing desk without bothering to light more than a single candle. The flame shivered, then steadied. She looked at the stack of foolscap before her. For months she had been drafting a response to the Home Secretary's position on the Corn Laws, a sharp, meticulously reasoned argument that dismantled the protectionist logic point by point. She had written it for herself, a private exercise, because a woman who published such things risked social annihilation. She had told herself it was enough to think clearly, even if she must keep silent. That had been before a marquis called her a vase. Helena picked up her quill. She dipped it in the inkwell with a hand that did not tremble. At the top of the first fresh page she wrote in her clean, unadorned script, observations on the price of bread and the folly of men. Then she paused, considered, and added a signature, Peregrine. The peregrine falcon, sharp-sighted, swift, deadly to its prey. She began to write in earnest. The candle burned down and London slept, and the first true salvo of Helena Vance's mind took shape on the page, not a woman's plea, but a strategist's dissection. By dawn, the pamphlet was complete. She sealed it in paper addressed to a printer in Paternoster Row who owed her late father a favor and asked no questions about anonymous authors. When she finally rose, her back ached and her eyes stung, but a strange, unfamiliar warmth had replaced the cold behind her ribs. It felt like purpose. It felt like the first step on a long road she had been forbidden to walk. The Marquess of Lockwood did not yet know that the vase he had mocked was about to shatter his certainties from a distance he could not see. 3 weeks later, The name Peregrine was spoken in every drawing room, coffee house, and club from St. James's to Mayfair. The pamphlet, slim and inexpensive, had sold through 2 printings. Its arguments were lucid, its prose elegant without ornament, its conclusions devastating. It quoted Adam Smith, referenced harvest data, and ended with a quiet, brutal question about the moral cost of protecting land at the expense of laborers. No one knew who had written it. Helena, seated at Lady Bramley's literary salon with a cup of tepid tea, listened to the speculation with a face of polite interest. Around her, opinions flew like shuttlecocks. A barrister insisted the author must be a Whig member of Parliament. A poetess declared the style betrayed a classical education, surely Eton and Oxford. Helena let a small, private smile touch the rim of her cup and said nothing. The Marquess of Lockwood arrived late, filling the doorway in a coat of midnight blue. He moved through the room with the unconscious authority of a man who expected doors to open and conversations to pause. His dark hair was swept back from a brow that suggested intellect, and his gray eyes swept the gathering with the faint impatience of someone searching for a worthy opponent. They landed on Helena for a fraction of a second, registered her presence as one might register a familiar piece of furniture, and moved on. Lady Bramley, a gregarious widow, immediately drew him into the debate. "My lord, you must have an opinion on our mysterious Peregrine, a radical genius or a dangerous meddler." Lockwood accepted a glass of Madeira, a mind worth engaging which is rare enough. The argument against protectionism is well structured, though I take issue with the assumption that moral sentiment should dictate trade policy. He paused, and a sardonic note entered his voice. "I would very much like to meet the man and show him where he errs." "Perhaps he would show you the same," Helena said. The words were soft, almost tossed away, but they cut through the chatter. Heads turned. Lockwood's gaze sharpened and fixed on her properly for what might have been the first time in their acquaintance. "I beg your pardon, Miss Vance." She set down her cup with a small, precise click. "Only that a mind capable of structuring such an argument is unlikely to have overlooked the counterpoints you mention. Perhaps Peregrine has already anticipated them and found them wanting." A brief silence. Lady Bramley's eyebrows rose. Lockwood's expression shifted, surprise, then a flicker of something that might have been respect struggling against annoyance. "You have read the pamphlet, then?" "I can read, my lord. It is a common enough skill among women, though I understand the news has not yet reached every corner of London." A startled laugh escaped the barrister. Lockwood's jaw tightened, but his eyes remained on Helena with an intensity that had been entirely absent before. "And what did you make of the author's use of grain yield statistics?" "I thought the correlation between tariff height and rural starvation was drawn with commendable restraint," she replied. "A less disciplined writer would have indulged in sentiment. Peregrine let the numbers speak, which is why the pamphlet is so difficult to dismiss." Lockwood opened his mouth, closed it, and took a considering sip of his Madeira. The conversation moved on, but his gaze returned to her more than once, a puzzle piece that no longer fit its assigned slot. Later, as the salon broke into smaller groups, Helena rose to examine a shelf of books near the window. Lockwood appeared beside her with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to strategic approaches. "You read deeply for someone who, if I recall, offers little in ballroom conversation." She did not look at him. Ballroom conversation asks little of anyone. It is a ritual of pleasant noises. One can participate perfectly with "indeed" and a smile. He went very still. The words "indeed, my lord" must have landed like a personal echo. Color touched the high planes of his cheekbones. Helena plucked a volume from the shelf. It was the very economic treatise Peregrine had cited most heavily. She held it for a moment, then replaced it, letting him see the title. "If you will excuse me, my lord. My mother expects me." She left him standing by the shelf. the book between them like a spoken challenge he had not yet learned to translate. The second Peregrine pamphlet appeared a fortnight later. This one abandoned general principles and named names. It dissected the voting record of a dozen peers who had blocked reform, exposing inconsistencies, vested interests, and one particularly embarrassing arrangement involving a cousin's grain contract. The Marquess of Lockwood featured prominently in the fourth paragraph. It is not malice, but a failure of imagination that limits the noble Marquess, Peregrine wrote. He defends a system that has never asked him to imagine hunger. London devoured it. Lockwood, by all reports, was incandescent. He demanded his secretary trace the author. He wrote a furious rebuttal in the Morning Chronicle. Peregrine did not reply. Helena read his rebuttal over breakfast and found it surprisingly well argued, marred only by an undercurrent of wounded pride. She allowed herself a quiet sense of satisfaction and folded the paper neatly beside her plate. The dinner party at Lord and Lady Halstead's 3 nights later was an intimate affair of 20 covers. Helena found herself seated, by careful maneuver or cosmic jest, directly opposite Lord Lockwood. Thomas Ashby, a scholar of modest fortune and genuine warmth, occupied the place to her right. He had been attentive for several weeks, discussing books and ideas with an eagerness that asked nothing but her company. The conversation turned, as all conversations now did, to Peregrine. "The arrogance of the creature is staggering," Lockwood announced, setting down his soup spoon with more force than necessary. "To impugn men of public service without revealing himself, a coward's tactic." "Is anonymity cowardice?" Helena asked, tilting her head. "Or is it prudence when the powerful might silence an unfashionable voice?" "A voice that hides behind a false name cannot claim moral courage." "Yet a voice that speaks from behind a title and 5 generations of protection might pause before lecturing others on courage, might it not?" She spoke evenly, as if discussing the weather, but the table had gone quiet. Candles guttered in a draught. Lockwood's eyes darkened. "You defend a stranger whose identity you cannot know." "I defend the principle that ideas should be judged on their merit, not the status of their author. The corn laws affect the laborer whether he can sign his name or not. Peregrine argues for him. You argue for those who dine on porcelain. The form of the argument matters less than the lives it touches." The silence that followed was not angry. It was charged, alive with a current that ran between them like a wire pulled taut. Thomas Ashby leaned in. "Miss Vance speaks with the precision of the pamphlets themselves. One might almost suspect a deeper familiarity." Helena laughed, light and dismissive. "Mr. Ashby, you flatter me. I merely pay attention. It is an undervalued habit." Lockwood did not laugh. His gaze had dropped to her hands, to the way she held her knife, to the ink stain on her middle finger that she had not quite scrubbed away. Something shifted in his expression, the beginning of a dreadful, wonderful suspicion. After the meal, as guests drifted toward the drawing room, Lockwood's secretary appeared in the hall, visibly agitated. He pressed a folded paper into his employer's hand and murmured urgently. Lockwood unfolded it, read, and went rigid. It was a note from the printer in Paternoster Row, meant for Peregrine, redirected by a bribed courier. "Dear Madam, the proofs are ready for your review at your earliest convenience. We remain, as always, your obedient servants." The handwriting on the envelope matched the careful address on the letter Helena Vance had sent 3 weeks ago. Lockwood had seen that same handwriting on a place card at dinner, when she had written her name for the hostess. He looked up. Across the corridor, Helena was accepting her wrap from a footman, Thomas Ashby at her side, her profile serene as a cameo. She did not see him watching. She did not see the ground shift beneath his feet, the careful architecture of his assumptions collapsing into rubble. But as she stepped into the night, she felt the weight of a gaze on her back, and she allowed herself one small, fierce smile that no one could see. Lockwood found her 4 days later in the gardens of Norrington House, where a musicale had spilled onto the torchlit terrace. She had slipped away from the soprano's piercing aria and stood beside a fountain shaped like a grieving nymph, the water's murmur cloaking her solitude. He approached without preamble, footsteps urgent on gravel. "Miss Vance, a word." She turned. Moonlight silvered the planes of her face, revealing nothing. "My lord." He stopped an arm's length away, chest rising with the breath of a man who had sprinted mentally across a chasm. "It is you, Peregrine. Do not trouble to deny it. I have seen the correspondence." Helena considered him. She could see it now, the sleepless night behind his eyes, the angry set of his jaw warring with something rower. Contrition, perhaps, still learning its own shape. "I have no intention of denying it," she said. "I am not ashamed of what I wrote. You let me argue with you across 3 drawing rooms, while knowing you were the author of those attacks on my character. I let you argue. You did not require my permission." She smoothed a fold of her gown. "And the attacks were on your policies and your failure of imagination, as I recall. I said nothing about your character. That would have been personal." A ragged laugh escaped him. It felt personal. "Perhaps because the policies are personal to you. They protect your interests. That was, I believe, the point." He paced a tight circle, then faced her again. "Why? Why write in secret? Why not speak openly? A woman who publishes political argument is a curiosity at best, a pariah at worst. I preferred to be heard before I was dismissed." She paused, and the next words came deliberate as a surgeon's blade. "Besides, you made your opinion of my conversational skills quite clear at Lady Ashford's ball. Pretty enough to marry, not smart enough to speak. A charming vase, you called me. I thought it best not to subject you to further vacancy." The blood drained from his face. In the silver light, he looked suddenly younger, stripped of the Marquess's armor, a man confronting his own cruelty in its full, humiliating echo. "You heard that." "I hear a great deal. It is one of the advantages of being mistaken for furniture." She drew her shawl tighter, not from cold. "I did not write to punish you, Lord Lockwood. I wrote because I had things to say that mattered. Your contempt was merely the spur that finally broke my silence." He was silent for a long moment. The fountain wept into its basin. Somewhere inside the house, the soprano launched into a cadenza that sounded like a crystal breaking. "I have no defense," he said at last, his voice roughened. "I spoke out of arrogance and laziness. I dismissed you without ever truly seeing you. I have been a fool and a cruel one, and I am sorry." Helena studied him, searching for the performance. She found only a man standing in the wreckage of his own pride, not begging but offering the apology as a thing of weight, expecting nothing. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I accept your apology, but I do not yet trust your regard. You are sorry you were caught. You are sorry you were wrong. Whether you are sorry for the woman you wounded or merely for the blow to your own self-image, time will tell." She walked past him, back toward the lit terrace, leaving him alone with the fountain and the moon and the slow, difficult work of becoming someone better. The next morning, Thomas Ashby called at Curzon Street and in the sunlit morning room asked Helena to be his wife. He spoke of shared interests, mutual respect, a quiet life of books and companionship. He was kind, intelligent, and utterly safe. Helena asked for a week to consider. She did not think of Lockwood when she gave her answer, or told herself she did not. The afternoon post brought a letter sealed with the Lockwood crest. Inside, in a hand that shook slightly on the downstrokes, were 4 lines. "I am not sorry I was caught. I am sorry I gave you cause to need catching. I will prove it if you permit. J." She folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer beside the draft of her next pamphlet. She did not reply. The exposure came at the Duchess of Thornley's ball, the crowning event of the season. 300 guests filled the ballroom, its ceiling a frescoed heaven of allegorical virtues. Helena wore a gown of deep emerald silk, her hair threaded with seed pearls. Thomas Ashby had claimed the first 2 dances. Lockwood, watching from the edge of the floor, had claimed none. Halfway through the evening, Lady Portia and Dicot, a viscountess with a talent for malice, ascended the small dais where the orchestra rested between sets and clapped her hands for attention. The room quieted by degrees, fans stilling, conversations trailing into expectancy. "I have a delightful announcement," Lady Portia declared, her smile a blade wrapped in velvet. "The ton has been consumed by the mystery of the pamphleteer Peregrine. I am thrilled to reveal that the sharp-tongued radical is none other than Miss Helena Vance." A collective intake of breath. Hundreds of eyes swiveled. Helena felt the weight of them like a physical pressure, but she did not flinch. She stood very still near a marble column, the same posture she had held months ago at Lady Ashford's ball, only now the light was harsher and there was no pillar to hide behind. Whispers erupted, a buzzing hive of scandal. Words like unseemly and bluestocking and deceit surfaced like scum on water. Lady Portia's smile widened, triumphant. Lockwood moved. He did not hurry, but he moved with a purpose that parted the crowd before him. He climbed the dais and stood beside Lady Portia, who blinked in surprise. "Thank you, Lady Portia," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the hushed room, "for providing me the opportunity to speak. Miss Vance is indeed Peregrine. She is also the most brilliant political mind I have encountered, male or female, and the pamphlets that have so engaged the nation are her work." He paused, scanning the crowd with a gaze that dared interruption. "I know this because, months ago, I publicly dismissed her as a woman with nothing to say. I was wrong in every possible way. The fault was not in her silence but in my refusal to listen. I stand here now to correct that error, and to state plainly that Helena Vance is a woman of extraordinary intellect, courage, and integrity. Any censure offered tonight should be directed at me, not at her." The silence that followed was deeper than the one before it, stunned, processing, a society recalibrating its allegiances in real time. Lady Portia's mouth opened and closed without sound. Helena remained motionless for a count of 5. Then she walked forward, not to the dais but to the center of the floor, and spoke with the clear, unhurried authority she had learned behind a desk at dawn. "I wrote the pamphlets because the policies discussed in them affect the lives of people who have no voice in this room. I make no apology for that. I also make no apology for publishing anonymously. A woman who wishes to be heard in matters of state must often choose between her reputation and her purpose. I chose my purpose. I would choose it again." She turned to Lockwood, meeting his eyes. "I thank you for your defense, my lord. It was bravely done." Then she walked to the terrace doors, and the crowd parted for her this time, not with scorn but with a strange, unsettled awe. Lockwood followed her onto the terrace. The night air was cool, scented with jasmine. She stood at the balustrade, looking out over the dark gardens. "Marry me," he said. She turned. "Why? Because you feel guilty, because you wish to rescue me from scandal." "Because I have been an arrogant fool who mistook silence for emptiness, and I have spent weeks discovering how much I stand to lose if you walk away. Because you are the only person who has ever made me want to be worthy of an argument. Because I—" "Stop." Her voice was gentle, final. "I will not marry a man who offers himself as penance. If you want me, earn the right to ask again, not with grand gestures, with time and listening and the hard work of change. Then perhaps I will consider." She left him on the terrace, and he did not follow. He stood alone, watching her silhouette disappear into the lit house, and he understood for the first time what it meant to want something he could not command. The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution. Lockwood did not pursue Helena with flowers or flattery. He pursued her with ideas. He sent her books, not novels or poetry, but dense volumes on political economy, annotated in his own hand with questions and counterarguments. He attended salons where she spoke and listened without interrupting. He wrote a public retraction of his earlier economic positions and credited her reasoning. He invited her, through a mutual friend, to join a small committee drafting a bill on rural grain relief. She accepted. They met often in the library of his townhouse, A vast room of leather and lamplight where maps lay unrolled across the table and inkwells ran dry from overuse. Their debates grew fierce, then companionable, then something more. A rhythm of minds that caught and released and caught again, a dance neither wished to end. Thomas Ashby noticed the shift before Helena fully admitted it. One afternoon, walking with her in Green Park, he stopped beneath a stand of elms. "You have not given me your answer," he said, "but I think I already know it. You look at him differently. You argue with him as if the argument itself is a form of affection." Helena felt heat touch her cheeks, not the heat of shame but of recognition. "Thomas, I am fond of you. I could build a contented life with you, I think, but with him," she hesitated. "With him I am not content. I am alive and challenged and seen. I did not expect it. I am not certain I trust it yet. But I cannot marry you while he occupies that space." Ashby nodded, a quiet sadness in his eyes but no bitterness. "Then I release you from any obligation. He is a fortunate man if he has the sense to know it." Lockwood did not propose again immediately. He waited until an evening when they had finished their work on the grain bill and sat across from each other in the library, the silence comfortable, the fire burning low. He reached into his coat and withdrew a letter, folded and sealed. "I wrote this in case I lose my nerve," he said. "Read it later or now, as you prefer." She broke the seal while he watched, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. "Helena," the letter began, abandoning all formality, "I have spent my adult life believing intelligence was a weapon to be wielded against the world. You taught me it is a bridge. I have no interest in a marriage of convenience or a union of appearances. I want the woman who dismantled my certainties and rebuilt them into something humbler and truer. I want the mind that writes at dawn and the voice that speaks for those who cannot. If you will have me, I will spend every day proving that I have learned to listen. Yours, Julian." She lowered the letter. He was watching her with an expression she had never seen on his face before, unguarded, hopeful, terrified. "You did not ask a question in this letter," she said. "I was afraid of the answer." "Ask it now." He rose, crossed the space between them, and knelt before her chair, not in supplication but in earnestness, as if the posture itself was a promise. "Helena Vance, will you do me the honor of becoming my partner, my equal, and my wife?" She reached out and laid her palm against his cheek. "Yes, on one condition." "Name it." "We present the grain bill together in both our names. The ton will say I am overreaching. I want them to say it while I stand at your side in the light." "Done." He turned his head and pressed a kiss into her palm, and then, slowly, reverently, he kissed her mouth. The fire crackled, the maps lay still, the library held its breath. Later, when he walked her to her carriage, he mentioned that his grandmother, the Dowager Marchioness, had requested an audience. "She is formidable, and she has opinions about women who write pamphlets." Helena smiled, the same fierce smile she had worn in the darkness months ago. "Then I shall write her a pamphlet." Lockwood House in Berkeley Square was a monument to generations of St. Clairs, its corridors lined with portraits that seemed to frown upon any hint of change. The Dowager Marchioness, a woman of 80 years and iron will, received Helena in the gold drawing-room, a space so opulent it felt like a gilded cage. Lady St. Clair was straight-backed in a chair of crimson velvet, her white hair coiled like a crown, her eyes sharp as chipped flint. "So," the Dowager said without preamble, "you are the woman who has convinced my grandson that political insurrection is a suitable pastime for a marchioness." Helena took the chair opposite without waiting for an invitation. "I am the woman who helped him draft a bill that will feed thousands of families this winter. I consider that rather more than a pastime." The Dowager's eyebrows rose a fraction. "You are direct." "You do not strike me as a woman who values indirection. You have managed this family's affairs for 40 years. You understand power, its uses and its limits. I am not here to charm you. I am here to tell you that your grandson is a better man than he was 6 months ago, and that I intend to continue making him better, not through obedience but through partnership. If that threatens the family legacy, then the legacy is more fragile than I have been led to believe." A long pause. The clock on the mantel ticked. The dowager's gaze swept over Helena's face, her posture, the steady clasp of her hands. Then, unexpectedly, the old woman laughed, a dry, rustling sound like pages turning. "I told my late husband once that I wished to attend a parliamentary debate. He informed me that politics was not a woman's sphere. I informed him that his dinner would be cold for a fortnight. He relented." She leaned forward. "I have watched my grandson parade a dozen eligible misses through this room. They simpered and blushed and said everything they thought I wished to hear. You are the first who has spoken to me as an equal. I find I do not dislike it." Helena allowed herself a small smile. "Then we understand each other." "We do. You will face opposition. The Tun will never fully accept a marchioness who writes pamphlets, but the Tun is a creature of habit and habits change. My support will accelerate the change. You shall have it." The wedding took place in the small stone church at Lockwood's country seat, not in London. It was a quiet affair by aristocratic standards, 50 guests, no trumpets, no towering floral displays, but every person present had been chosen with care. Thomas Ashby attended and pressed Helena's hand with genuine warmth. Lady Bramley wept. The dowager sat in the front pew, nodding approval like a general reviewing troops. Helena wore ivory silk and no veil. She walked down the aisle alone because she had always walked her own path, and Julian met her at the altar with eyes that shone. Their vows were the standard words, but after the ring was placed, Julian spoke again, softly for her ears alone. "Pretty enough to marry and more than smart enough to speak. I was half right and entirely blind. I am grateful every day that you opened my eyes." She laced her fingers through his. "Prove it." He did. 5 years later, on an autumn evening in their London home, a dinner guest, a young earl new to his title, remarked that the Marquess of Lockwood was remarkably clever for a woman of her beauty. The table went still. Several guests winced. The earl, sensing a misstep, looked around in confusion. Julian set down his glass with a quiet clink. "You are several years too late with that observation, my lord. My wife is not clever for a beautiful woman. She is brilliant for any human being, and I would advise you to remember it." Helena, seated at the opposite end of the table, caught his eye and smiled. It was not a smile of triumph that had faded long ago, unnecessary now. It was a smile of partnership, of shared roads and hard-won understanding, of a vase that had turned out to hold a world. Julian raised his glass to her, a silent toast across the candlelight. She raised hers in return. Some proofs, she thought, never ended. They simply became the shape of a life.